know last week some people asked me some questions afterwards for clarification about the hostage deal. So I would suggest you go to our YouTube channel where we have about the hostages a complete class. But I would just say that we're dealing with life and death issues. So to say a clear halachic response would not be correct for an individual to do. But I would just say is that highly, highly problematic halachically to free people who are saying they're going to kill again, and we know they've killed and they'll kill again, and it happened last time, and lopsided, and releasing them to areas where they can continue to do harm, and they're not even claiming they're not going to do harm. And you are emboldening and awakening and igniting all the rest of the Arab world because they are going to pitch this as a success, and they are pitching it as a victory. So even though in Israel you may have some religious political parties claiming that this is the right move to do, I would argue that for the vast majority, they're not saying this. Their halachic authorities are not saying this. This doesn't mean it isn't complicated. It is complicated, and there are many layers of the complication. But the gist of it is that the ability for the terrorists to exact defeat from Israel, whether withdrawal from territory or giving up the ability to defend themselves or to giving up murderers, is the only reason they're taking hostages is because we have taught them that works. So from a halachic point of view, you're endangering lives. It's highly problematic. So again, I don't want to, for a life and death issue, it takes very broad shoulders to talk about it. And once something is done, you may be able to find some levels of justification. But even the left in Israel, or the center left, who are been very vocal about supporting it, they understand that this can't continue to go on. And if it continues to go on, you've doomed yourself to never being able to be successful, never able to deter, because all they have to do is take a hostage. And Hezbollah is telling itself the reason why Israel went after us the way they did, we didn't have 100 hostages. If we had 100 hostages, we would have been better off. But either way, again, there's more to be said about it. And I thought that those who were there from the beginning may have heard that pretty clearly. So it's very important to differentiate between hostages of someone looking for ransom or someone looking to enslave. And then there's questions of what's the price paid? And even if you go into prisoner exchange with despots, with rogue regimes, it's a 1-for-1, not 100-for-1, not 30-for-1. And in addition, leaving aside even the murderers, it's retreating from the territory that you're controlling, where you have the ability to ensure that they don't rearm and attack again. When they're saying right now, we're going to do it again. We did it. We'll do it again. We're getting child soldiers to get involved. All right. So in short, I would say it's clear it's the wrong thing to do. On the other hand, for these people who are being released, they got their life back. All the people who were killed, and God forbid will be killed, are also we have to care about. So that's why these are difficult decisions. But there's no question going forward, it can't continue like this. Okay, I want to jump into the problem of Qatar. So Qatar controls 10% of the world's energy, and they are 300,000 citizens. They have 3 million people there that are not citizens, but about 300,000 are citizens, and they control 10% of energy for the world. I want to talk about what they're known for and then connect it to some themes from the Parsha. And these themes, we hope, will shed light on what's happening in the world, but also in our own service of Hashem. So 3 elements. We'll talk a little bit about the political, a little bit about the Parsha, and a little bit about the lessons from the Parsha, and also lessons for ourselves. feel free to ask a question, raise a hand. So what you have in Islam, here's a book I read a while ago. This book was by Dory Gold, who was a former ambassador to the UN. It was called Hatred's Kingdom: How Saudi Arabia Supports the New Global Terrorism. Right now, Saudi Arabia is our friend, or wants to be our friend, or we want them to be our friend. It wasn't that long ago 9/11 happened. And 9/11, people involved were from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Some of the people who planned it and were involved at the highest levels were Qataris officials who had worked for the government. And in Saudi Arabia as well, there are people here involved on the ambassador level and other levels involved in this attack on America. And this stuff is public record for different reasons, primarily economic and oil, and because we deal with imperfect partners, both America and Israel, is that we've buried many of these stories, and we haven't allowed court cases take place for these 9/11 people. Why? What don't we want them to say in court? Why are we making these deals with them? Why are we making plea deals with these, what should have been the trial of the century? Please. This stuff is not conspiracy theories. This stuff is out there, what we have from former investigators and people involved, that's not even classified. There's enough stuff out there. So my point is, I want to go back to Saudi Arabia for a moment, which is larger, of course, than Qatar, and talk about Wahhabism. So many of you may be familiar with these things, but just think of a brief overview. There are two main groups in Islam, the Sunni and the Shia. The Shia are Iran and its supporters, or its compatriots, co-religionists, and then you have the Sunni. The majority of the Arab world is Sunni. When it comes to terrorist groups, Hezbollah is Shia. Hamas is Sunni. And these people, in general, ideologically, they view each other as heretics. But hating the Jews makes for strange bedfellows, and they collaborate with one another at times against the Jews. The Sunnis, their radicalism was funded by, for all the years, through Saudi Arabia. What happened in the 70s in Iran was the Shia Islamists took over, Khomeini took over, and all his followers, and they began to fund Shia terrorism and proxy groups such as Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, and create what we now know as a circle of fire around Israel. Meanwhile, with the Sunnis, I don't want to call them the good guys. The Sunnis, what gave birth to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Islamic Brotherhood, funded, taught Wahhabism, which was a throwback to 7th century original, what they understood to be original desert warfare, Islam, radical. But it was, in the 1800s. And in Saudi Arabia, this school of thought, after radicals overran the Mecca and over complaints about the irreligiosity and the corruption of the Saudi royal family, Saudi Arabia in the 70s began to fund mosques all over the world, in Pakistan and everywhere else, funding, of course, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, with America's help, of course, which, these problems, unintended consequences. But the point is, they funded and supported the Sunni radicals all over the world, and Wahhabism, which is this, and then Salafi, which are these political Islam. It's not, the Islam of Saudi Arabia is run by a monarchy, but they exported the radicalism as much as possible, and they also had a balance of power with religious authorities. Recently, the Crown Prince has been turning Saudi Arabia into a nightclub. In other words, from the top down, he's been making changes in the society. This is not organic change. This is a change from on top. Diversify your economy. They understand that the oil won't last forever. They understand alternative fuels may be coming, nuclear energy, solar energy, green, and also limited reserves. At some point, they're going to run out. and they are diversifying. And one of the ways they're diversifying, they do not have local resources other than oil and energy. So they want to diversify, and they have tremendous amounts of investments all across the world and in America. So Saudi Arabia, though, has begun a process of top-down modernization. We don't know how it will end. Okay, in other words, anyone who thinks they know, it's like the Arab Spring. It could have taken in certain places. You give democracy, or you get radicals. Sadat got massacred by the Islamic Brotherhood, got assassinated by the Islamic Brotherhood. In other words, just because you right now have this MBS who's busy controlling any levels of radicalism within his Saudi Arabia, it doesn't mean it's going to last. Meanwhile, though, Qatar has taken over that mantle from Saudi Arabia. They have become the cheerleaders, the funders, the instigators of Wahhabism and Salafism all over the world. Wherever there's radical Islam, any party, Sudan, wherever you are, Yemen, any of these places, Gaza, you're going to find the hand of Qatar and the money of Qatar and the funding of Qatar. So basically, radical Sunnism as an outreach organization designed to create revolution and chaos is being funded, instigated by Qatar. Tremendous amounts of money. One of the things they were doing, they were working with the Al-Qaeda and these others, where they would kidnap Westerners and then Qatar would pay for it. This way they funded tens of millions of dollars to these radicals. In other words, they said, don't worry, we'll cover it. So in other words, there were all these elements at play. Now, the reality is, all over the world, everyone, including Israel, has been collaborating with Qatar. Israel, if it didn't want to get fined and shut down for sending money to terrorists and Hamas, because if it did it through the banking system, international banking would have shut down the Israeli banks, because you can't send money to terrorists. So Qatar sent truckloads of cash. So what's happening is Israel also felt it was the lesser of two evils. Plus, there are tremendous numbers of organizations and entities, both Jewish and, of course, non-Jewish, of higher education and others, that are funded by Qatar. I'm just going to share with you just a list of some of the, some of the reports on Qatar. Bear with me for a moment. Here we are. So, just for a moment here, this is a website, ISGAT. The leader, the head of it, is someone that was at Yale first for the anti-Semitic, for a think tank against anti-Semitism and Holocaust studies. Professor Small, I believe his name is. But we have here is Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, funding of higher education in the United States. That's one report. Then you have South Africa, Hamas, Iran, and Qatar, the hijacking of the ANC, International Court of Justice. Qatar is paying off. Qatar is paying off South Africa. South Africa are not principled anti-Semites. They're opportunists right now. Qatar is principled. They have an agenda. They sincerely want to promote Salafi Wahhabism in modern garb. It's clear, and they say this themselves, and you can see this. We'll get to that in a second. So here you have a report on that, the hijacking International Court of Justice and the funding of Qatar. Qatar's funding them, giving money to South Africa in order to promote these things. The ongoing failure to report, all Yale University and others are not declaring funds they're getting from Qatar. The representative that Trump just sent to Israel, that was part of this process of pressuring Israel to make a deal. And again, we don't know what happened behind the scenes, but let's just talk about him. His hotel, his property was going out of business, and it was going bankrupt, and Qatar bought it for $650 million. That's what took him out of his money, is straight from Qatar. And he's not alone. There are many other people that are throwing money all over the place. There are Jewish organizations. And it wasn't just Israel as well. It's a terrible thing. One of the largest organizations in America that deals with all the federations and the security for Jewish communities. I think it's called SNC. I'll look what it's called. But this entity, so the head of it worked for Qatar-based organizations. I mean, he claims it's not exactly Qatar-based, but he was there and he was involved without question in these initiatives that Qatar was funding. In other words, this reaches very deep, all over the place, very broad, and they're trying to change and impact these universities, the think tanks, the both Democratic and Republican Party, and individual business people. So there's a lot of this stuff going on with Qatar. A little bit more just to see. Columbia University from class into campus politics, and all Qatar's, a lot of money coming from Qatar, and they've never reported it. No references can actually Colombian, Qatari entities in financial statements. The NSJP. So all this stuff, if you go to ISGAP, ISGAP, you can see all this sort of stuff. Now I just want to take a quick look at some other stuff here. Yeah. Can you see this where it says memory now? You see memory? Or did I change the screen? Yeah, it shows up. All right, so Qatar is a monarchy, and it's an absolute monarchy, even though they have different layers of people that the king appoints. But really, it's run by the king. Nothing happens here without this centralized authority wanting it to go on. And without talking about Al Jazeera in general, but the bigger picture, this is this what's going on in their media. Let me make it drop smaller so we can see the whole thing. All right. Victory is ours. These are the cartoons in their papers. A Hamas hand coming out of it. Oops. Here, 1 second.
Rabbi, can you post those links in the chat?
Yeah, I will do that. I'm just going to all the articles in Al Jazeera and in their internal Arabic stuff, and is all promoting this idea of it being a victory. And we're going to go on. The top leadership says, we're going on to take over the Temple Mount. We're going to the victory. We rub their nose in it, and it will be the fuel of resistance. And these are the leadership are saying things like this. So I'm going to copy at the end the links right now. Okay, let me figure out how to do that. All right. So I want to talk now so Qatar has this element where it has been the headquarters for the Taliban, for Al Qaeda for a while, for Hamas. And then when they want to negotiate, they go and negotiate. But a lot of times they're the ones giving the money, instigating, educating, protecting, promoting these things. On the other hand, they wear Western garb because their point is to have this Salafi Wahhabism in modern garb. That's what it is. Now, the fact is, the people who are enemies yesterday may end up becoming our friends tomorrow. But we just have to recognize that there really is a strong ideology here that's being funded and promoted. And it's not easy, as we see from Iran and Saudi Arabia, of putting the cat back in the bag. In other words, if you teach people for 50, 60, 70 years that this is part and parcel of what it means to be a Muslim, you're going to have an impact. And this reformation of Islam has not begun, and it's being promoted actively by Qatar and beamed into everyone's homes. And the reality is that when Saudi Arabia and their allies tried to boycott Qatar, America stopped it. The Trump administration stopped it or went along with stopping it. So the point is, it is not simple. It is not simple. And again, Israel is on board with this too. Israel also has been working with Qatar. The President Herzog thanked them for their wonderful work. So to say that it's, I think with politics, people are used to working with imperfect partners, but I do believe we will be coming to a place where those who support terrorism will have to be shut down themselves, because this idea that everyone has clean hands because they're not doing it directly, they're just supporting it and cheerleading it and funding it, is all fine and good until it blows up in people's faces. And ultimately, of course, it comes after them too, because there's a lot of money there, and there's no guarantee that the king will end up staying in power either. So this is the reality that we're dealing with. So I want to get to the Torah portion, talk about a few things, three different themes that are related to this. Number one, okay. Let me just get rid of that for a moment. Okay. So let me stop the share for a minute. Okay. So I want to talk about three separate things. The power of propaganda in the Torah portion, trickery, the danger of the mouth, and wealth. These ideas, trickery, propaganda, wealth, are all themes in the anti-Semitism and the war of Egypt in the Parsha against the Jews. So I want to start from the beginning. Moshe is told, take your stick and cast it before Paro. It will turn into a snake. Later on, he's told, and this week, that was the first Parsha, and this week he's told, take the staff that turned into a snake and show up at the water, at the Nile, and you're going to smite it, it will turn to blood, and then, or Aaron will smite it, and then later on, the next plague is hit it, and frogs will come out. So all these elements, let's talk first about the staff. The idea of the snake. A snake in Judaism has symbolism, going back to the Garden of Eden. You find the snake is the tempter to Adam and Chava, to Chava and then to Adam. And it is also seen as being sly. It says here it's the wisest of all creatures, and the Targum translates it the most sly, because the Hebrew word chachma, wisdom, can sometimes be translated as crafty and sometimes wise. These words, it depends on the context. So it's a value judgment. So when we say that a snake was wisest of all creatures, we mean crafty and sly. It represents that. So when Moshe is told, throw down your stick before Paro and it'll become a snake, there's layers of symbolism here. So I'm going to start with one layer of symbolism. The snake. The snake in the Garden of Eden, the snake of the forked tongue, the snake that tempts, the snake that corrupts. And the story is told, how did Paro actually get the Jews to be enslaved? The Medrash fills in the gaps of the story, because if you look at the story itself, it says, let us act wisely, hava nischachma, let's act wisely with the Jews, because we see they become numerous, more numerous than us, and they may rebel and leave the land or drive us out of the land. May be what they're referring to. They're afraid that just as they had conquered others and taken over that kingdom, the Jews would do the same. The sons of Yaakov, the Bnei Yisrael, would do the same to them. And they say, let us act wisely. But it doesn't say what the wisely is exactly in the text. So one interpretation is the next verses say they enslaved them, that the enslaving was done in a wise manner. How was it done? Well, there are different hints scattered throughout the text. Let me just throw out a few other questions. Why was the tribe of Levi, the Levites, never enslaved? We find in the Torah that Paro tells Moshe and Aaron, go to your own work. Let the people do their work. As if Moshe and Aaron have another form of labor that they're supposed to be doing. So there's a tradition, and it's also based on the genealogy, where the Torah says the more they were tortured, the Jewish people, the more they were fruitful and multiplied. And the tribe with the fewest was the tribe of Levi. And the tradition is the tribe of Levi was never enslaved. And there are different reasons given for it. One reason is that they had a religious exemption. Every community had priests, and the Jewish priests were the Levites. They didn't have to be. They had parsonage. They didn't have to pay the taxes. In Hebrew, They weren't really enslaved. The Sarei Misim, a mas, is a tax, but they had to do a certain amount of work every day. Because you can see from the biblical text, the Jews owned their own sheep, they owned possessions, they weren't owned bodily as slaves, but they were working all the time because they had labor that had to be done. They were tax masters, not just task masters. Mas is taxes. So there is a story told earlier in the Torah that Yosef, when he collects all the food of all the lands in Egypt, and then the people begin to sell their land to Yosef, where he centralizes all the economic policies, a little bit not exactly capitalistic what he does. But he ends up just taking a fifth from everybody, like taxes, gives it back to them. The land belongs to them. They get to work it. They get to keep 4/5 of it. 1/5 goes to Paro, but the priests are not subject to the tax. So because the priesthood was happy and they were grateful for Yosef, that also became the policy in Egypt not to force the Jewish priests, the Levites, to be enslaved as well. But there's another story that speaks of this wisdom. Let us be wise. That Paro put on a golden brick. How did he get them all to be enslaved? If he said they're strong and mightier than us, how did he trick them? So the Midrash says he put a golden brick around his neck and picked up a shovel and said, "Let's make Egypt great. Who has dual loyalty? You don't have dual loyalty? Be a good citizen. I'm volunteering. You volunteer." And everyone began to volunteer to build the pyramids or whatever it was, the cities, or Ramses, or public works. And they all begin to work. And slowly the king peels away, the royalty peels away. And every day you have these people who are pushing the people working to meet their quotas. And they got used to following these orders. Everyone's being a good citizen, except for the Levites. The Levites knew that they would carry the ark and they would serve God. So they stayed and studied Torah. That's how the Medrash puts it. And one fine morning, the Jews woke up and they were the only ones working. But now they were used to listening to the orders. Plus, there were people with whips forcing them to work and keep whatever they were doing until then. In other words, it was originally volunteer and then it became work. The point is they were tricked. So this idea of trickery, let us act in a crafty manner against the Jews, this really personifies, I would say, the techniques of Qatar. It's totally the idea of underhanded trickery, speaking out of both sides of their mouth, supporting both, being both the arsonist and the fireman. So we find this with Paro. Number one, this idea of trickery. And then the other idea related to it, but it is the issue of the power of the mouth. The Jews are told right from the very beginning, when Jacob is taking the blessing from his father and he dresses up like Esau, so Yitzchak rubs and feels Yaakov's hands and says, the voice is the voice of Jacob. The hands are the hands of Esau. So later generations understood it, that the Jewish, and from other places as well, of course, the Jewish people's power is in their mouth. Prayer, study of Torah. Sometimes, of course, we got to pick up the hands of Esau. We got to use weaponry if we have that capability. But it's not our natural state. Our natural state is Torah, prayer. That's what we want to be. That's what we want to do. Sometimes we put on the garb of Esau. We wear the skins of the goats, of Esau's clothing, of Esau's skin. We act like that. That's not our true self. So the idea of the voice is being the power is very intrinsic to Judaism. What you have here, you had individuals that represented the opposite of it. So I'm gonna go through a few different concepts. Paro can be read as peh ra, the bad mouth. In other words, there was speech involved in his corruption of the Jews, and also what ends up being enslaved by the Jews. So the Jews don't cry out for a long time. Their mouth is also enslaved. They don't They don't recognize their true power. It's been usurped, so to speak, by bad mouth. Power can be read as bad mouth. Pesach, Passover, can be read as the mouth that speaks. Moshe says, I'm of uncircumcised lips. They stop at the lip of the ocean. Moshe is placed at the lip of the river. There is this element of, on Pesach night, that we speak ourselves free. You know, Magid, the telling of the story is the freedom. We talk our way out of it, so to speak. So this idea of Al Jazeera, which is all about literally through the power of speech and words corrupting the world, we can learn from, in the sense of the power of the message and the medium to be able to impact. You know, what Voice of America once did and other such things is a necessity to combat that propaganda. In Israel today, for the first time, you have Arabic and Farsi speakers speaking directly to these audiences. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a necessity. Just to go back for a little bit about this idea of the mouth setting us free, you know, we say in our Hallel, Hemanti kiadaber, which can be read as, I believe because I spoke. That there's something to be said about verbalizing and articulating our truths, even when the world is not necessarily listening. That's a counteract. And one of the messages about Moshe is that Moshe, who has a rasafasayim, uncircumcised lips, or heavy of mouth, or stuffed up mouth, different versions of what he says, ultimately becomes the great communicator. He becomes the one that teaches the Torah. It becomes healed, so to speak. Okay, I want to get to wealth for a moment. Why was there such hubris in Paro? He had the Nile River. You know, the Fertile Crescent has the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that overflows and allows with Iraq and that area to be well irrigated, because it doesn't overflow, but they have a canal systems that would bring water to very far distances from these great big rivers that would water their fields. Egypt had one better. Egypt had the Nile, which always overflowed, and that made them feel like Paro says, I am the river and I made myself. Li Hayor, to me is the river, or I am the river, to me is the river, and I made myself. This vision of identification of idol worship, because the Nile fed them and sustained them. Israel is the only place without those natural resources in the area. They're dependent on rain. The Jordan is not enough to water Israel. So, well, it wasn't even when it was larger, was it capable of it. It's dependent on rain, as opposed to the Tigris and Euphrates, and of course the Nile even more so. So the Nile, they have this source of energy that was flowing to them in those days. Nowadays, these Arab Gulf countries have a Nile of their own, without any sort of open borders, open ideas, any sort of democracy. They have tremendous wealth. They're controlling just that little country, 10% of all the energy in that little Qatar. Forget about Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, all these other entities that have power. Qatar alone has this great wealth, like the Nile, in the sense of, and this allows for denial, for this hubris, for this funding and doing whatever you like without any level of humility. So I just want to say that, you know, and again, this is, so to speak, part of the problem. And this is why alternative forms of energy, or, and again, I don't know if it's enough just to drill, baby, drill, or enough to do other forms to really pull down the prices of energy. I would think that whether it's solar or nuclear, many things, that there were agendas that were not just about protecting the environment that came into play, that really took away the ability for the West not to be held hostage by primitive barbarians who want to control. And that's the reality. I'm not saying they can't evolve, but they didn't have to evolve. One of the themes of the world has been that you have to open up your borders in order to participate in a global economy. Not if you're pumping up the Nile from your wells of black oil, of black gold. You don't. You can control whatever you want because you have control of a flow of wealth. And now that wealth is being spread all over and corrupting many, many, many ecosystems. So that's another danger, so to speak. There's a story told just about the power of the mouth. Who is known among the Jewish, the non-Jewish prophets as being the one with the power of the mouth? This is Bilam, or Balaam in English. I'll use the Hebrew. Bilam. So Bilam is seen as having the ability to curse. If Abraham has the ability to bless and is a blesser, Bilam is a curser, but it's also with his mouth. And what's interesting is there's a beautiful midrash that will really help lay the groundwork for some of our future classes as well. In 2 weeks from now, I want to talk about Yisro, Jethro, and the Druze. The Druze see themselves as being descendants of Yisro, but they're related in many ways to Yisro and to the potential for the righteous allies of the Jewish people. So we'll get to the Druze, but in 2 weeks. But Yisro is Moshe's father-in-law. So it's a midrash that puts together 3 different Gentiles who are famous in the Torah. The 3 famous Gentiles who interact in some way with the Jews or end up with a book in the Bible of the Torah of their own are Yisro, Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, Bilam, the prophet that is going to curse the Jews and end up with Midian and Moab fighting against the Jews and also plotting against them, corrupting them. And then you have Job, Eov. Eov does not seem to have any connection to the Jewish people. It's a book about a poor guy who tragedy strikes, and it's a question about when bad things happen to good people, how do we respond? That's what the book of Eov is about. But the Midrash puts these 3 people in a room: Yisro, Bilam, and Eov, and says they were advisors to Paro at the time when he wants to enslave the Jews. And Paro says to them, because, hey, even though he's a king, he has advisors for a reason. Best advice money can buy. And he says to them, what should we do with these troublesome Jews? You know, what should we do? Eov says nothing. He's silent. Yisro says, don't do that. Don't kill them. Don't enslave them. Let them be. They're not trying to harm you. Don't be afraid of them just because they're becoming stronger. They're not out to get you. Don't do the wrong thing. And Bilam says, kill them all. Kill them all. Get rid of them. So ultimately, Yisro has to run away because giving advice to someone who doesn't want to hear your advice, now you become the naysayer. He runs away to the land of Midian, where he ultimately becomes Moshe's father-in-law. He's rewarded. He has a Torah portion named after him. Job is quiet, and ultimately he ends up with all this suffering. So this midrash is really giving a reason for his suffering and saying, by being silent, you sometimes become a partner. Even if you think that you're not, you're thinking, hey, I'm with Yisro. I'm just not going to jeopardize my existence for these Jews, but I'll be quiet. And meanwhile, Paro then says, well, I'm with the advisor Bilam, and it's 2 against 1 because you're quiet. In other words, those for good people doing nothing, that becomes an issue. But Bilam ultimately becomes, with the power of his mouth, becomes this antagonist and enemy of the Jews. So again, pulling full circle, if we're looking at the role of Qatar today, it has been one. You go to Al Jazeera, and I go there religiously. I'll be honest with you. I go there because it's less hurtful than going to Haaretz. Haaretz is the left-wing Jewish paper. But here, Al Jazeera, at least you know where they stand. But where they stand is neck deep in the muck. Neck deep in murderous propaganda and justifying. Not one picture of a hostage coming out. All about when it's happening. All about the other end, the victory, the duality of a genocide and a great victory happening with the Palestinians somehow. This is the Qataris mantra. And this is what they're spreading like poison, and they are, waking up the Islamic world in that way. And it's a serious challenge. And with God's help, um, I think that people are starting to wake up to it in Congress and other places. But it's going to take a serious um, weaning oneself off this flow of black gold that has been permeating every part of the West: art, literature, universities, the highest levels, politics, business people, and they put on a veneer. And this is like the snake. The snake also is the same symbolism of this. What we call, there's a quote in the Talmud about those who do the deeds of Zimri. Zimri is the adulterer who causes the plague to come upon the Jews, and they seek the reward of Pinchas. In other words, they light the fire and then they want to be rewarded for it. Or another approach is Yanai was a king of the Hasmoneans who became a Sadducee later in life. And on his deathbed, he told his sons, "Do not be afraid of the Pharisees. Do not be afraid of the Sadducees, but be afraid of the Pharisees who do the deeds of the Sadducees." In other words, be afraid of the hypocrites. In other words, be very afraid of those who are presenting one face and acting in another way. This insidious level of evil doing is something which is very difficult to root out, because they're funding, they're giving all sorts of good things as well, but there's a price to pay. And the price to pay is this radical Islam, which is not content to just staying in its box. It is funding all over the world. Every radical group, they're funding in some way of Islamists. So this is the challenge. Again, Paro himself ultimately becomes an open enemy of the Jew. So another element just of connection of Paro is Paro himself sees himself as the snake. I am the Tanin. In Hebrew, in the Torah, we have here different names for the snake: Nachash, Tanin. Tanin can also be read like we read in Psalms, Taninim, the great sea creatures. So some read it as being a crocodile. This vision of Egypt that lives in the Nile. I am that great snake that lives inside and within the Nile. This is the imagery of Paro himself. So going back, when we smite the god of Paro, which is the Nile River, which is also the source of income, that is one of the first ways where they begin to see the hand of God. So ultimately, there's going to be a necessity to be able, whether it's through positive ways with alternative energy or things like that, or coming up with alternative sources of energy or boycotting, you're going to have to cut off the fountains in some way. Ultimately, it was the first step of the plagues, and ultimately, it's going to be the first step of weaning ourselves off of Qatar, I would say. Okay. Other element of this week's Torah portion. Let me see what I have here. Okay. Any thoughts before we dive in? Let's see. We have here some questions, some elements here. Okay. So we have here Eric Watsky put it. Thank you. And memory, exactly. Pal Watch, yes. Those are all the same places. Exactly. And they have one. And memory is really been working on this Qatar thing now for a while, and we'll see what happens with that. Any thoughts before anyone want to interject with some other issues about this? Won't be shy. Okay. Now to like personal service of Hashem. If we're looking at the negative of others, and then we have to ask ourselves, okay, in our own personal lives, how do we recognize these flaws that we have in our as individuals, the personal service of Hashem. Just to clarify, every story in the Torah is both a message for the Jewish people for the future, but it's also a message for us as individuals to be able to serve Hashem as individuals. So, number one, let's talk about wealth for a moment. One of the great challenges in the Torah is that it tells us you'll come to the land of Israel and you'll have abundance, and you will end up rebelling against God, because when things are good, the nature can be where I'm a self-made man. I am the river, or the river is mine, and I made myself. So this type of attitude that we have, our success, we say failure is an orphan, success has many parents. We're really supposed to reverse it. We're supposed to, when we succeed, we say, thank God. When we fail, we should say, okay, what could I have done better, both spiritually and religiously, and looking for ways to be better. But success we give to God, and failure we give to ourselves. Of course, we believe everything comes from God as well, but it's an opportunity for growth. And you find this with the mitzvah, let's say, of grace after meals, which Moshe composes the first paragraph in the desert when the manna falls. And what we're saying is, when you eat and you're satiated, you should thank God. In other words, when you're hungry and you're thanking God before, so there's an element where you feel needy. You feel you're missing something. But the mitzvah is, the biblical commandment is, after you eat and you satiate, when you could forget, I have what I need. I have no other need. I don't need anything. I'm all taken care of. To recognize then also that God is what satiated you. The mirror of this, or rather the bookend of this, is, let's say, Sukkot. Sukkot, when we bring in all our grain, and it's the end of the ingathering of the harvest, we go sit outside in the sukkah, because the natural state of the farmer to feel hubris, to feel independent, to feel as if everything is taken care of and there's no worries in the world and I'm all good, I don't need God to protect me, and is after the harvest. You brought in everything, it lay in the fields in the sun, and it got dry, and there was no worm or weevil or rain or mold, and you brought it all in, and you're set for the year. You have your retirement funds in. It's all good. I have my stocks, I'm all good. No, nothing could go wrong. You didn't see the market. No, the point is that God tells us, go out then into the field and live in a booth, which is temporary, to bring that home. So when things are good, we have to remember, so to speak, the challenges of not having, because that makes us humble. When things are bad, God forbid, we have to have hope in the good, and we believe God could always turn it and change it in a single moment. And we've seen that this year, total incredible transformations and new beginnings and tremendous opportunities. I'm talking about the land of Israel, but in general, there's that potential at any time. So we need to have both. When things are very good, we have to have the humility. When things are bad, we have to have the faith and the hope. The problem is when they are reversed, when we feel very satisfied and everything's taken care of when things are good, we lack that. So looking again at this theme, there is that element. Pesach, though we speak of the challenge of poverty, the Jewish people are so oppressed they can't cry out to God. We begin our Haggadah with, hey, lachmania, this bread of affliction, the achalu avastana that our forefathers ate. The Kabbalists read it, this bread of affliction that consumed our minds. We weren't able to think straight because we were suffering. In other words, the word fathers in Kabbalistic language is the intellect. Parents are the intellect. Father and mother are chachma, is the father, which is the creative energy of new ideas, and bina is analysis. They come together and they give birth to healthy emotions. So the parents, they get wiped out, they get dried out, is with suffering. There is this challenge of being able to, can I think straight? Am I thinking ahead? Which is one of the challenges when we are in a crisis. And right now, because there's its breathing room right now for the Jews in Israel. I believe over the next, there is a realignment and a recalibration and a rethinking. And even those who feel that right now we have to do these deals know that in the future we can't. And they know that we have to be much more proactive. And they know we're going to have to control other territories if these territories do not have leadership that can be deterred in conventional ways, and leadership that wants to survive. So there's this element of, for a political point of view, but even for ourselves, number one is that issue of wealth. The next issue is the mouth. Just like Pesach, we speak of speaking the right things, that our speech creates the reality. There's a line in the Psalms that that we're like a worm, or Jacob is called a worm. What does that mean? It doesn't just mean humble. It means in the context that the worm is eating the dirt, and it's going through the dirt with its mouth. Its weapon is its mouth. It burrows using its mouth. This idea, again, it's not beautiful imagery, but the idea that our power is in our mouth, both as a nation, prayer and Torah study is an important, integral part of who we are, but also as individuals, that how we speak creates a reality. If paro is pera, the bad mouth, we have to be peto. How we speak, that creates our own reality. So when we speak of lashon hara, which speaking in a negative way, either gossip or maybe even nivel peh, would be speaking in an inappropriate manner, in a coarse manner, or in a scatological or other forms of inappropriate talk, we become what we say. And this is why in Judaism there's such a premium placed on vows, for example, like kol nidre. Kol nidre, we make a big deal about any vow we may have made to ourselves. We're not talking about vows we made to others. Any vows or things that I uttered that I was going to do without saying explicitly, bli neder, this is not a vow. Why are vows so critical? Because we believe, just as God speaks and the world comes into being, our speech creates our reality. We get used to speaking in a negative way, in a depressing way, in a complaining way, in an irritable way. That creates a reality. There's a horrific, amazing story of the Baal Shem Tov that he once told his students to sing around a table, and he says, put your arms around one another, and then he closes a circle. He puts his arm around them, and all of a sudden they have a vision. They see what is happening in heaven, but they're hearing something from next door. Their room is next door to a gathering place where a Jew is saying about another, I'm going to rip him apart like a fish. I'm so upset with him. I'm going to rip him apart like a fish. And as they close the circle, they have a vision that up in heaven, he's ripping the guy in half, literally. And the horror, they didn't have horror films in those days. So to see that shook them up. A man taking another man and ripping him apart like you would rip apart a fish, to split a fish open. And they're shaken. And the Baal Shem Tov says, there's a world of action that we live in, but there's a world of speech. That what you say creates a reality. So on some level, when you curse someone, when you threaten someone, when you say, I would do such, you are creating that reality. So how we speak, how we, whether we're vulgar or cruel, and even about how we talk about ourselves, that also creates a reality. There's a story told about the Chafetz Chaim, who was known as being a person who was very meticulous about the laws of speaking properly and not gossiping. He was once on a train, and a man asked him where he was going. He said, I'm going to Rodin. And the Chafetz Chaim said, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to Rodin as well. Why are you going? I'm going to visit the holy Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim, the guy didn't recognize the Chafetz Chaim, he didn't know him. There weren't that many pictures of him around. And the Chofetz Chaim said, he's not so holy. He's not such a great man. And the man smacked the Chofetz Chaim in the face. Don't talk about Rabbi Rodin, the Rabbi of Rodin like that, the Chofetz Chaim. Later on, he came to Rodin and he comes to the Chofetz Chaim and he sees him and he's shocked. And he says, "Oy, forgive me. What have I done? I smacked him in the face. Forgive me." He's crying. The Chofetz Chaim said, no, you taught me an important lesson. We can't speak evil even about ourselves. How we speak of ourselves also matters. So this idea of a pet tov, of a good mouth, is again, part of the theme of the counteracting of the para, of paro, the bad mouth. And the other theme, just to close with this idea, was about subterfuge, the idea of being a hypocrite, hypocrisy. In Hebrew, they call it modern today tzavua. If you are one dyed, one on the outside and one on the inside, that hypocrisy doesn't mean that you don't. Someone could think and accuse somebody of hypocrisy if they have, let's say, high ideals for themselves and they try to live them, but they fail. You could say, "Oh, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite. You're talking in the middle of davening." And the kid will say, "You told me not to talk. Now you're talking." So it may not be consistent behavior, but if you value not talking and davening and you happen to fail because you saw your friend you haven't seen in 20 years and you're schmoozing, so you could recognize the failure. That's falling short is not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is putting on a show about something and trying to garner the praise and the views of others when you're not keeping it. It's not you don't really value it. You just value the perception of it. So this idea of hypocrisy, which is this idea of subterfuge, this idea of trickery, which is seen as the snake, it's seen as the corruption of the mouth, because it's a way of using your mouth to make yourself look better, to gain from projecting a certain image, is a crucial element in Judaism that we aim for, that our inner self and our outer self should correspond with one another. In other words, not just deliberate hypocrisy. Deliberate hypocrisy is totally not proper. But sometimes we have, like with Yosef and his brothers, it says that the brothers cannot speak with him peaceably. They couldn't speak with him in a proper manner because they were angry at him. So our sages see this as something positive, that they were not hypocritical with him. They were rather consistent. They didn't want to pretend that they were happy with him when they weren't. So the problem with politics, of course, is you don't say everything you're thinking. So politicians and playing politics, that's not exactly, there's a level of subterfuge there that's different than in your personal life. We recognize that. I want to close with a story from the Talmud. Last night when we were studying Midrash, we have a 6-week class of Midrash, which I recorded it, trying to upload it so those who are not here in person can follow along. But one of the themes we spoke about was from the Haggadah, where Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I'm like 70 years old. And we read a story, we spoke rather about a story about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He was taking over the leadership of the yeshiva, the Sanhedrin, from Rabbi Gamliel, who was deposed because of treating a different sage with disrespect. So Rabbi Gamliel was the leader, and he's deposed for a while, and this Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah takes over. And there's a story told in the Talmud that the day Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took over the yeshiva, many benches were added, many students were admitted, because Rabbi Gamliel had a very high bar to get into the yeshiva. He would have guards at the door who would be able to say, is your innards like your outer? Is your inner life consistent with what you're presenting? Are you totally harmonious? Are you really what you present? This idea of being toho tabaro, is the inside like the outside? By the way, it's not a big deal to make your outside like your inside. Just make yourself, look and act more coarse outside. That's easy. To change the inside is much more difficult. So when Gamliel left, that tells you, by the way, what high levels the guards were. These guards were spiritual savants. They could look at a person and see, are you a totally consistent, harmonious person? These were the guards. These weren't the teachers. These were the security outside the yeshiva. They say that after that happened, Rabbi Gamliel felt bad. And because he said, did I hold back so many people from Torah study? So from heaven, they showed him urns filled with ashes sitting on the benches, as if the students that were added to the benches were not really worthy. And our sages say, is that really true? Were they really unworthy? And they say no. But from heaven, they showed Rabbi Gamliel something that was untrue in order to placate him, because he had been so broken by losing his power and also losing his position, and also holding back all this Torah study. Because the belief of the other sages was that through being in a good environment, you'll change your innards to your outer. Doesn't have to necessarily happen before. But just a full circle to pull this together. So this doesn't mean when you say, I cannot be a hypocrite, that you have to say everything you're thinking. In other words, even from heaven, they placated Rabbi Gamliel. But it means this idea of subterfuge, trying to trick people for your benefit, not to alleviate the pain in them. But that type of thing, that type of not being a trickster, not being someone who pretends to be looking out for your good and then does something that's not for your good, like Paro did with getting the Jews to volunteer. He made it seem like they were being good, loyal citizens, but really they were attempting to enslave them. So for us, there's this idea, another basic message about don't be like the Qataris. Don't be a hypocrite. Be honest with yourself and with others, and not subterfuge, and not double talk, not like the snake and not like Paro. And the other messages were use our wealth in a positive way, but with humility. And also how careful we have to be with our mouths. L'chaim, l'chaim. Everyone should have a wonderful Shabbos. And Sunday morning, those who are around would love to see you. And anytime you want to drop by Shabbos, we're here as well. Have a good Shabbos, everyone. Anyone want to share anything before I say goodbye?
That was really great. There was a lot to absorb. So yeah.
Okay. So if you have specific things you want me to focus on, let me know in the format, like the way I have it here, the format, half hour on, the political situation of what's happening in the world, and then 10 minutes, a Jewish perspective on it, and then something related to us, all from the Parsha. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say ad-libbing, but it's a little bit fluid and flexible. So feel free to give me some ideas. So I am going to talk about the Yisro and the Druze and Parshas Yisro, but that's 2 weeks away. So next week I haven't yet solidified. So if you have ideas of what we should cover, let me know. That gives me a framework as well. Good Shabbos. Let's see what any of the notes were. We had a few notes here. The notes were, check out, okay, Avi Abelo. I'll check them out. And all right, good. We will check out Avi Abelo. All right, and also if you know Memory, Carolyn Glick, she just had someone on from Memory talking about Qatar. And again, I think Memory is great, and these other ones are great. And I mean, if you just do you even see the Jewish research papers that did research on all these projects. It's so pervasive and all over the place. Their influence peddling. It's incredible. It's going to take a lot to devein, to pull them out from so many entities. They're really embedded. So with God's help, America will be able to do it. Israel will be able to do it. And we should see good news. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you.